Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Column News. It's the 24th of April 2014 and it's just gone 1 o'clock. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson are here in Plymouth on a really sunny day.
It is very nice, and I think quite a lot of the country's got some good weather today, so long may it continue.
Where are we going first? Who's going
Well,
first?
we're going to start off actually with a subject which the UK Column has been watching for some considerable time, but it's the government's activities in amongst in particular the Muslim communities in England, and the Guardian's picking up on a very, very interesting story. Here's the headline: Syria crisis, stop your sons joining the war. And this is a plea from the Met Police. Counter-terrorism officers make plea to Muslim women as more young men head off to fight in what they're now calling a civil war. So it's very interesting to see how things have changed. But this is a little part of the meat of this article. Sajjad Mughal of the Jan Trust, which aims to empower disadvantaged women, is supporting the nationwide police campaign. And look at what they say. Women are agents of change, particularly mums in the home. They are the ones who can nurture and safeguard their children. So a beautiful statement here, starting to show us what's really going on. So we've got the Jan Trust. It's not really interested in mums and nurturing children. It's interested in what mums can do to be agents of change. So we're going to go into this in a bit more detail, because obviously it's an extremely important subject. But we thought we'd just give you a reminder as to how the British government actually works to prevent terrorism and violent extremism. So here's a couple of fairly recent newspaper articles. Let's see what the British government's been up to keep the world a peaceful place. Well, David Cameron said that Britain, of course, must bomb Syria to prevent more devastating chemical weapon attacks. And we now know that, once again, the British public told an absolute pack of lies over who was responsible for chemical weapons. Was any proof ever presented to the table? No. But look at the language: must bomb Syria. So we're talking about another sovereign nation state. This is the pattern with Iraq, with Afghanistan, and Libya. And of course we've got a few more examples here. David Cameron says the British military attack must be a judgment call, and there he is waving his finger. Of course, Britain, we don't have any problems here. We feed everybody we can get from A to B with no potholes. But he's wagging his finger at Syria. We need to get in there and bomb a few more people. Well, it's just brilliant, isn't it? The Telegraph here shows the other side. Anybody who dared to put across a different view will be attacked by Mr. Cameron himself, because his agenda is to get in and cause violence in countries overseas. And probably the thing is that you reap what you sow. And let's remember this man, Philip Hammond, the Minister of War. We must not cower from bullies and ignore evil. So he was desperate to get a greater attack going in. These were his words after it didn't happen. He was disappointed that Parliament chose to reject calls for British forces to attack Syria. By attack, what we're doing is really using a nice little adjective to cover up killing and maiming people, and he was disappointed that the British government didn't get in there to kill and maim more people.
I don't know if I'm dreaming this, but I'm sure just before we came down I saw something appear online that there's the Syrians are going to do elections, and actually Assad's population has really increased. Popularity. Popularity has really increased since all this fiasco. So if the Syrian people are now looking more in favour of Assad, that should be our cue to completely leave it alone now.
Well, it would be interesting to know what the exact truth is. This is what we're being told. But of course, if you look at it from the point of view of people on the ground in Syria, their lives are destroyed. The country is destroyed. Their families are destroyed. Thousands and thousands of deaths. If you had a choice between saying, let's get stability and we'll vote for Assad, would you do it, or would you want to see people continuing to die. Yeah. But who has been at the back of stirring up the violence? Well, of course, it's been the British and the American governments. And now let's return to the subject, to the fact, of course, this aggressive overseas action has produced a backlash in Britain, which the government is now trying to calm down, or are they? Well, the article we started with, the Guardian article there, went on to quote this lady, Helen Ball. She's the Senior National Coordinator Counter-Terrorism with the Met Police. And she said, we want to ensure that people, particularly women, who are concerned about their loved ones are given enough information about what they can do to prevent this from happening. She's talking about men going off to fight in Syria. We want to increase their confidence in the police and partners, to encourage them to come forward so that we can intervene and help. This is not about criminalising people, it's about preventing tragedies. So we start the violence overseas, we help Syria absolutely wreck itself, and then we're going to say, well, actually, trust us because we're the good guys. And Big Pharma's got in there as well, over there, to start vaccinating all the children in Syria as well. So they've had the doors open. Of course. Well, just looking a little bit deeper into Helen Ball, we find from Policing Today that, of course, she's actually come back into the Met Police from Thames Valley, and we like to focus on Thames Valley because Thames Valley Police, we now know from seeing the documents, simply failed to investigate abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, and we're going to be talking a little bit about wider crime figures in the UK. But this lady has been quite an important person in a Thames Valley police force that simply overlooked the crime. So why should we trust these people? Well, that's the police, but if we get in a bit deeper, let's go and have a look at what the UK government has been up to. And if you go on the gov.uk website, you can find the policy for protecting us all against terrorism. And I do recommend people go and have a read of some of this stuff because it defies belief, really, in what they have to say. So we've got a strategy called PREVENT. It says it's responding to the ideological challenge we face from terrorism and aspects of extremism and the threat we face from those who promote these views. It provides practical help to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism and to ensure that they're given appropriate advice and support. And it works with a wide range of sectors, including education, criminal justice, faith, charities, online and health, where there are risks of radicalisation that we need to deal with. So that's all the good words. We were quite interested in this little section. It says our strategy will be proportionate to the risks we face and only engage in activity which is necessary to address those risks. It will be transparent wherever possible and consistent with the national security we seek to make. And consistent with national security, we seek to make more information available in order to help the public to hold the government to account over its policy and spending decisions. So it's all about transparency, and you can get into it deeper because we can then go from the prevent to the contest strategy, which is actually for countering terrorism in UK. So how much transparency has the government put into looking at what the government's been doing to help stir up violence and terrorism? Well, we just bring you back to the article we had yesterday, which of course that at the moment the Chilcot inquiry has not produced a single jot of evidence around why Tony Blair took us into yet another unlawful war.
There are reports actually out today that it's looking like it's going to be yet another 6 months till anything comes out, especially about those conversations, because they really don't want to release those tapes between Bush and Blair.
Well, of course, you don't want to release any of this information. Cook report over anything to do with the paedophiles operating at the Westminster End. We don't want to deal with that. We don't want to deal with Elm House. And of course, if you take a country to war unlawfully and you end up literally murdering hundreds of thousands or millions of people, you certainly don't want that to come out. But remember that the government's official policy is transparency at all levels. And I think later Mike will be mentioning the transparency king of the Conservative Party, which is Mr. Francis Maude. So, what's been going on inside the communities? Well, luckily the government's own communities department has been running strategies to counter terrorism. We are very suspicious about these strategies because they appear to be achieving the opposite effect. We're seeing more problems, not less. But this is going back to the era of Hazel Blears. And here's the document, Preventing Violent Extremism, Next Steps for Communities. And of course, who's involved in this type of activity? A bit difficult to see on screen, but I assure you that is referring to our old friends Common Purpose. So, what have they been up to? Well, we point out here the amounts of money that have been spent. This is the result of a Freedom of Information request. And look at the figures, 2006-7, 85,000 on leadership training to 40 Muslim community leaders, 65,000 to 60 emerging leaders within the Muslim community, and 65,000 for training for 65 younger members of the Muslim community. This is all selected by Common Purpose, the political charity that has been working from central government to reframe the way we think. It's quite interesting, this. Let's get into some detail here, because we happen to have an email sent from Mark Carroll from the Government Community Department to Julia Middleton, talking about Common Purpose funding. And he says, Julia, I understand there's been some confusion regarding our support for your work to place 20 imams and 20 Muslim women through your development programs. And I think it best that we quickly resolve this. I think it best that you continue to place the individuals you have identified on the programs so as not to delay any further. We had hoped to have a much closer involvement in the selection of these individuals, which through a breakdown in communication has not transpired. We're keen to support this work again in the next financial year, although we cannot commit to this at the moment. Now, my point is that here we have individuals being selected by the government to be trained to do what? To help calm things down, or are these the people being trained in order to promote the government's view? Yeah. So we'll leave people to make up their minds on that particular aspect, but we'll finish this section by just coming back to the Jan Trust, which we started at the beginning with the Guardian article there, and recommend you go and have a look at this organisation. You would love it, Louise.
Yeah, more baronesses.
Well, it's topped up with baronesses, and once you get into the baronesses, you get into law firms, you get into financial matters, you get into stuff to do with the government, and you're not really sure what you're dealing with here. Is this charity, or is this another quasi-political charity? So there we have it. We would say that probably if Cameron Blair government hadn't been overseas stirring up unlawful wars, we presumably wouldn't have a problem with people getting upset in UK. And if we really want to solve the problem, let's not get rid of ordinary people in communities, but let's replace the British government. So, before I hand over to Mike, this email was sent to us this morning, and the gentleman kindly pointed out that there was some recruiting going on, and they wanted volunteers, skilled people who knew about social media enthusiasts. Do you engage on a variety of different social channels? We're looking for someone creative and dynamic that has a natural flair for social media engagement. Now, what are these people wanted for? Well, they're wanted for this. They're going to work with Alert's Communication and Europe team and will be responsible for running a short-term social media campaign to counter racist and xenophobic discourse in the UK in the run-up to the European elections. So we've got an organisation which is going to work to actually change the way people look at the elections. Well, we may have made a mistake, and if anybody can correct us, but we think this is the organisation to which that job advert refers. And it's a charity which says it's promoting peace all over the world. It's doing a lot of work in Africa, but it's also doing work in UK and Europe. And if we have a look at the people, well, surprise, surprise, we've got a lot of experience in the United Nations. So here we think we've got some straight elections coming up, but what we're actually seeing is the government getting straight into the back door of social media.
I wonder if these guys take on like the trolls as well to crush, like, you know, how a lot of people in the truth have been under attack. You know, and it's clearly it's just not individuals. There is people working on the other side.
Well,
I mean, this is the kind of company we need to look at, isn't it? The other companies like this.
We've got the security services who openly admit they're doing this, and we know from the massive recruitment programs they've had, where they were at one stage, MI5 was after another 5,000 agents. These are not agents to go out and be James Bond in the field. These are people sitting at computers or processors to do analytical work. So we know these massive numbers of people have been recruited, and we also know from information given to us that, of course, these people are put to use to get in amongst the social media.
Yeah.
But you don't know what you're dealing with. Are you dealing with David Cameron and Francis Maude, or are you dealing with a charity? It's all become blurry. What have you got, Mike?
Well, today, Francis Maude, there he is, on the right-hand side there. He's welcoming France into the Open Government Club. So the question is, what is open government? Well, according to the definition, it's the governing doctrine which holds that citizens have the right to access the documents and proceedings of the government to allow for effective public oversight. And we've hinted at that in your first section there, Brian, but of course it isn't really that at all, because if you and I have access to the data, it's really pretty useless to us unless we have a Cray supercomputer sitting in our garden shed. So it's really only useful to big corporations that have the processing power to churn it up, and that's what open data is about. It's about making the government's big data, which is the catchphrase of the year, available to the big corporations. And just like HMRC is about to do with our tax data, the NHS is already doing it, and many other government DVLA is doing it as well. So many other government agencies doing that. Hundreds of companies, in fact, are now building entire businesses on the fact that they do have access to open data. So that is Francis Maude welcoming France to the Big Data Open Data Club.
It's a bit like a guillotine, that, Mike, actually. I reckon if you'd have had that coming down from the top, we could have dealt with the problem in 30 seconds.
Well, indeed. Here's the press release. The 64th nation to join the club. Now I saw a quote in The Guardian recently which sums up the situation pretty well. It said both types of data, talking about big data and open data, it says both types of data can transform the world, but when government turns big data into open data, it's especially powerful. So that says it all. I think this is a pretty dangerous initiative, this whole open data thing, and 64 countries now part of it, and of course that these huge big data sets going straight into corporates for whatever they want to do with them.
One world government.
Yeah.
I think we've got to say that it's in your face, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's in your face.
Well, just remember that the whole big data thing was on last year's Bilderberg Group agenda, so we'll see what happens for this year in this area.
Do you think it will be in sorry, going off tangent, do you think it's going to be in, I think they're saying Denmark, aren't they?
Yeah, well, that's what they're saying, but who knows?
We don't know.
Anyway, moving on, Ukraine. Obviously, this was yesterday's headline on the BBC, but events are actually escalating within the Ukraine towards civil war. Ukrainian commandos have attacked a town in the east of the country where the locals have put up barricades and occupied buildings. These people are being described by the BBC as separatists, of course, which is how many steps away from terrorists? Not many. They were. I mean, these people were basically protesting in their own way, and now the commandos have been sent in. The Russians, of course, taking a dim view of this, and Putin this morning saying if the regime in Kiev has begun using the army against the population inside the country, then this is undoubtedly a very serious crime. But of course, undoubtedly, it will be the army defending themselves. Yesterday, of course, the BBC had this headline, and they thought best to stoke up a bit more anti-Russian sentiment by blowing what is a fairly regular occurrence out of a bit out of proportion. Philip Hammond, Minister of War, as you said, Brian, I think has acknowledged that this happens reasonably regularly. I think it happened 8 or 9 times last year, where Russian aircraft flying in international airspace were considered to be getting just a little bit too close to the UK's airspace, and so aircraft were scrambled. But this headline implies that it's something a bit more serious than that.
This has been going on for years. It's tactical games, really. The Russians come down to take a look and a sniff as to what's going on, so they send in their reconnaissance units. Sometimes months go by, sometimes there's a flurry of activity. I would guess that probably the Russians at the moment feel that maybe it's time to do this, but is it any more significance than over previous times? I don't think so. But the thing we should remember is that we've got a major situation which has been stoked up, certainly by Britain and Europe, in the Ukraine, on Russia's doorstep. And this has come at the time, of course, that Cameron and Blair have cut Britain's own armed forces to the bone. So when we see pictures of Eurofighters, we actually start to analyse what the capability is of the Royal Air Force and indeed the Army at the moment. Britain is in no position to do anything in a sustained military sense, and we've got plenty of ex-military people who have been telling us this for some years, that the capability to mount a serious overseas campaign is non-existent. So, of course, when we hear the rhetoric from Cameron and William Hague that we need to do things in Ukraine, or whether it's to bring troops into Poland, the only troops that are going to be used with any major effect are American troops. And I think this is one of the shocking things about David Cameron. He's clearly prepared to sacrifice the lives of Americans in order to progress his imperialist Cameron agenda.
I think something's just happened as well on the border over in the Ukraine, is it not, Mike? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's the incident at the...
OK, so we're going to go fracking, are we? And it's a bit of good news, actually. There's a family over in Texas called the Parr family, and they started to become ill back in 2008, just after fracking started in their area. The whole family were affected by poor breathing, nausea, nosebleeds, and in the end the Parr family sought legal help. They ended up suing Arab Petroleum in 2011 and yesterday won a $3 million compensation. Aruba say that they're going to argue that there are dozens of gas drilling operations going on in that area and that Aruba may not be entirely to blame. Excuse me, but according to EcoWatch, other firms have actually settled privately with the Parrs outside of court. Now, I know Ian Crane will probably want to go quite a lot in depth with this one, but I mean, at least it's positive that it's now being recognised that the danger and the damage this fracking is doing to people.
Well, of course, this is one of the things that we've been hearing our own government saying time after time, that this is a safe process, and of course, by the sheer type and volume of the chemicals being used, it's clearly not safe. So precedents here set in America.
Yeah, and hopefully
France has not changed its own ban on fracking. But of course, Britain is fair game for anybody Cameron and his team want to bring in. What have you got, Mike? Because you've got some to add, I think.
Indeed, because Britain is absolutely pushing the pro-fracking agenda. Channel 4 News here going for it. Because North Dakota is booming, as we can see from this article, and this is highlighting one town, Williston, which has seen the population boom from 10,000 inhabitants to 25,000 as a result of the frackers. Salaries there are pretty nuts, with rig workers paid as much as $150,000 a year. Rents in that town are now the highest in the entire United States, even higher than in New York. So Williston is being described as a boomtown, and this is really being presented as something that we should all aspire to. But of course, it's not just the environmental effects in terms of poisoning the water and the land and the soil and the air that is a problem, because what this Channel 4 article doesn't mention is the effect that fracking in the United States is having on food production. So what's been going on there? Well, here we've got a train, and that is a freight train, of course, and the problem is that freight carrier BNSF is prioritising fracked oil over everything else, and as a result there's a massive backlog in the transport of farming freight. Farmers are unable to get their winter wheat harvests, which have just been cut. The winter wheat harvest, they can't get them brought to market, and they're absolutely unable to get fertiliser deliveries for the coming summer wheat season. And as a result, US food banks are already hitting shortages, and we can expect food price rises and so on. So who is BNSF? Well, they're the second largest freight carrier in the US. They service the areas that are being fracked at the moment. But of course, they're wholly owned by Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company, who just happens to also own most of the fracking companies that are operating in that area. And this is why the fracking oil is getting priority over food. And this has got to be seen as a pretty insane policy. And, you know, expect price rises, because we're talking about the breadbasket of the United States. This is the main wheat growing area. It's insane.
Shocking. I mean, what it's doing to the land. I mean, it's seriously damaging the animals that live. The livestock, the cattle, the horses. Now the wheat's going to be affected, and food shortages are coming for them in America. So what's going to happen over here when it really does get into force?
What is it? America sneezes and we catch the cold, I think is the expression, or somewhere along. Somebody sent us some information the last couple of days, I think, which was talking about part of the Agenda 21 programme being to get rid of animals with cloven hooves.
Really?
So to get rid of the cattle stocks and horses and sheep, etc.
Wow.
So whether this is part of the game, so we can say that it's all nonsense, but if you look at it with a pair of dark glasses on, you can see an agenda which is clearly designed to attack the farming industry. Well, fracking, of course, has occupied the police in quite a big way in UK. And the BBC, we were interested to see, has been saying that crime has been falling by 15% in England and Wales. So Danny Shaw here, the Home Affairs correspondent at the BBC News, he had this to say: these figures come as no surprise. Crime has been falling almost continuously since the mid-1990s. What is unexpected, however, is the size of the reduction. The 15% fall is the biggest percentage decline since the survey began 33 years ago. The 22% drop in violence is also substantially more than in other years, reinforcing the recent findings by Cardiff University's study. The only statistics which tell a different story are those compiled by police forces. But these should be treated with an abundance of caution, not just because of concern the figures have been fiddled, but also because they hinge on whether victims report crimes or not. So I read this several times, and then I thought this man is being particularly disingenuous, or he's got his own agenda, because the headline is "Crime has fallen," but he's warning us that the very figures, that those statistics, well, where's the source? Are the police, who seem to be busy fiddling the figures. And of course we've experienced with Thames Valley Police that the way you remove crime in Oxford and Cherwell Valley College is simply not to investigate. And hey presto, we can start to skew the whole thing.
Mike's bouncing up.
Yeah, I understand that there's actually a PC. Can't remember his name. Has been effectively, because PCs can now be struck off if they commit some kind of disciplinary issue, and he's been put on this. He's effectively been struck off for whistleblowing on the fact that these figures had been manipulated. No, I unfortunately didn't include it in my batch of stuff today, but people should go and have a look for that story. I think Channel 4 News is carrying that.
Well, it's quite appropriate, isn't it? You don't want whistleblowers blowing the whistle on the fact that you are skewing the statistics. So in the main article, which I can just pick up on screen, it actually says that, fraud is up by 25%. So we've got bankers carrying out multi-billion-pound fraud on the nation. We've got those bankers protected by our politicians, who are themselves protecting the paedophiles around Elm House and Cyril Smith. But the BBC wants to convince us that crime is falling. And was it my imagination, but the BBC was the very organisation that made sure people coming forward to talk about sexual abuse around Savile in the BBC were quietly sidelined.
They were, and I think there's a story out today that the reporting of historic abuse, sexual abuse, has actually dropped. So old crimes, just up to December, it was up 22%, but now it's dropping back down for those coming forward
as a result of Savile.
As a result of Savile, apparently.
This is because there's no sign of these investigations being progressed.
And because of Yewtree, of what's happened with over Yewtree and Fernbridge.
Well, we just say well done, BBC, because it's unbelievable propaganda as usual. BBC tied up in the biggest paedophile activity that is going, but don't worry, crime's falling. Trust the BBC, well, if you like. And probably this one.
Yeah, this. Okay, I wasn't sure, and I did say to you, I don't know what we're really going to get out. The FBI are actually working alongside British detectives to find at least 90 victims of a paedophile teacher called William Vey, who worked at the South Bank International School in Westminster between 2009 and 2013. The FBI filed for a warrant to search a pen drive of Mr. Vey's, and 2 days later, Vey had actually committed suicide, and they found images of children going back to 2008, and now hoping victims from Britain will come forward. They're not out there, the police aren't actively out there asking for victims of Cyril Smith to come forward. No, are they? There's nothing there of what's going on in this country, you know, around our government and the establishment. They're not asking for any victims to come forward for that, but they are looking to get people involved with this case.
And the other case,
it's a harrowing case, granted.
Of course, and the other case, of course, that's now come to the fore is Maddie McCann. So we've got a multi-million-pound police operation, which is now saying that they're tracking down the paedophiles in Portugal.
Yep.
All of these things take public attention away from the real factual evidence which is coming out about activities of paedophiles within Westminster, within the top levels of Britain's police, within the security services, within political parties. Yeah. All of that has come out over Elm House, and we've now got this wall of silence by the establishment, and we've got Nick Clegg simply refusing to call for a further investigation into Cyril Smith.
And acknowledge it, and even being confronted with questions, he runs away. So.
And we'll just put this one up because it was the other part. This is the man. So, big article by the Mail. Obviously, abused children, terrible. But we're saying, what is the focus here? Is it really on catching the criminals, or are these diversionary articles to protect Britain's politicians?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so another taser article, and this time it's another police officer out of control with a taser. And Bristol Crown Court yesterday heard how a police officer tasered a naked man who threw a pair of pants at him. The officer, PC Lee Birch, fired the taser at a gentleman called Daniel Dove, who then collapsed. Dove told the court he had first been assaulted by PC Birch after being thrown out of a nightclub, where the officer pushed him to a puddle and over-tightened his handcuffs. The case is continuing, but I'm just inquiring, are there background checks and is proper training going on with these police officers in the use of these tasers? If there are two officers there with this gentleman, he throws a pair of pants and then gets tasered in the chest.
Come back to the case in Plymouth where the man doused himself in petrol in his back garden, obviously very disturbed, not threatening anybody, man covered in petrol. What do? Shoot a taser at him. So the police have stopped thinking. Is it that, or is it the fact they're being trained not to think? Yeah. And if you're a police officer out there and thinks that we're being particularly hard, we would say to you, please go and investigate what is really being done in the police training courses, particularly those courses using NLP. But activities around the police are getting worse. We picked this up from Policing Today. And the Welsh police are crowing that they're getting £90,000 to deal with call-outs involving mental health issues. And the argument is that they've lost a lot of police time by dealing with people who've got mental health issues. And now they are going to be able to take mental health nurses with them to the scene of incidents. And I get a creepy feeling about this, that it's bringing the state even closer. There's a bit of a dispute with your neighbour. Policeman turns up on the door and he's got his own mental health team, and the next minute somebody gets sectioned. Which of course is what is happening with mothers who try and protect their children from social services. And we reported on the case of Emma, who was simply lifted by the police.
How is she, actually?
Well, she's okay at the moment, but battling against social services who are trying to take her children. But a young mother simply lifted by the police at her Cornwall home, sectioned and locked up, and then forcibly medicated. So this is the state of Britain, if you're an overseas viewer. Meanwhile, the British government, of course, is looking for yet another war, presumably to increase the profits of their paymasters, the bankers and the armaments industry. Well, talking about people being locked up brings us really to Scotland, and I think you picked up on something here with Mr McCaskill.
Yes. Well, I have to admit I hadn't heard that this was going on, so it's quite staggering, really, in a way. McCaskill not looking too hot in that picture, but Scotland had planned that evidence in Scottish criminal trials would no longer need to come from two sources. So, in other words, no corroboration required anymore in Scottish criminal trials. Now, these plans have been put on hold for a year by ministers because of a backlash from various groups within the legal industry themselves, but not from the police. The police were absolutely pro this idea. So police and prosecutors pro the idea, but the other areas in the legal profession didn't like it much, and they believed that it raised the concern of an increased risk of miscarriage of justice. Now, of course, Brian, you and I have witnessed a case where there was no corroborative evidence in an alleged sexual crime. So that kind of thing is happening in the UK already, where people are being convicted without corroboration. But I suppose it's another step for the government to actually have that as a policy.
Well, yeah, this is a very interesting one, because part of this hangs on the special nature of Scottish law and the business that you have to have two reports in order to convict people. But the irony is that Scotland has the lowest conviction rate for sexual crime, I think, anywhere in Europe. And this brings us totally back onto the case of Holly Gregg, where it's been suppressed. While I'm talking, I'm just going to make a slight change to one of the slides here, so bear with me. We've basically got to the stage now where people can actually be locked up with no trial at all. What I'm doing is just changing the time that Robert Greene has been in prison, which I think is now up to 69 days, if somebody can check that for me.
I think so. And how long can he be held for?
150 days in total.
He can be held for 150 days, and there's been no official charges brought against him as yet?
No, if we bring this one on screen, which I think we're about right, he has been locked up now for 18 hours a day, originally picked up February the 13th.
Yeah.
So we've got February, March and well into April. We'll check that again. Apologies if we've got that wrong. But of course he has had no proper trial. Even the Scottish system that's locked him up has said, well, this should go to a jury trial. But he's not seeing anything of a jury trial because at the moment Alex Salmond's regime, and of course Kenny McCaskill involved in this as well, are desperate to backtrack because it's been publicly reported that Alex Salmond's personal office either destroyed or lost or deliberately obfuscated documents relating to the abuse of Holly Gregg. So this is where it gets. Scotland is giving us a prime example of what we're heading to south of the border once we've got a government that achieves political control through the court system. And we already know, of course, that take Tony Blair was able to use the so-called system of law in this country to justify his unlawful attack on Iraq. So Robert, we are saying to everybody, is in prison. He has angina at the moment.
Has he seen a doctor yet?
He has seen the prison doctor. He is saying that the prison itself is looking after him very well. But the point is there is absolutely no progress on getting him out on bail at the very minimum so that he can start to put his defence together. So as we've said several times, if you're English or Welsh, Scottish police can simply come south of the border and arrest you. Now this is a bit of good news. You can now buy a stamp advertising the plight of Robert Greene, and here of course with Anne and Holly herself. This is absolutely genuine. This is the address that you can actually order these stamps from, and we'd like to encourage people to buy as many as they can to start giving Robert some real publicity around the country. Okay, well, we're just going to end, since we've mentioned medicine, on doctors.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be ending because we've got two stories, I think. But new figures released have revealed that Big Pharma has paid more than $38 million in a year to British doctors for consultancy services. And the payments on the whole are basically to encourage the doctors to prescribe that manufacturer's drugs. GlaxoSmithKline have come out and said that they will stop the practice. So we'll just have to wait and see. But again, Big Pharma getting straight in there to our local GPs, whining and dining them. And what are we doing? Are we going to?
Well,
can I just touch on this?
We'd better just mention your aeroplane.
My aeroplane. Okay, so a little more for you on this. The story was actually published at the end of March, and it claims that along with this Philip Wood from IBM, who had a telephone and who took the photograph on his iPhone, there were 20 staff members from a company called Freestyle Semiconductors, and they had got a patent the day before the plane vanished for an electronic warfare gadget. Now, how this works, I'm unsure, but according to reports, the loss of these senior staff members on the planes means that the patent now automatically goes to Jacob Rothschild, and he becomes now the sole owner. So here's the company that these guys worked for, and I'm going to do a little bit more digging into it tonight, and here they are Freescale, and they had 20 senior members of staff on that plane with this new electronic warfare gadget. Right. So I'm going to have a little bit more of a dig into that. Again, it could be a massive distraction to everything else that's going on, but it's something that is another cover-up.
A lot of people would say a lot of free energy people have died over the years, so we're keeping an open mind on this, and we'll see what else comes through. Right.
UK column meeting tonight.
UK column meeting tonight, and also a gentleman which many of you may know called Bally, who we featured in the UK column a few months ago, who's actually with us in the studio, but off camera at the moment. But he's also holding a meeting in Plymouth tonight. Remind me of the pub.
The Maritime Inn.
The Maritime Inn, and that's starting at
about 6:15 doors open.
6:15.
We'll start at 7.
Okay, we're seeing if we can get a tie-up with the UK column meeting. We'll do our best to try that. Things stacking up and happening at once. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us today. If you haven't written to Robert Greene, we'd encourage you to do that. If you've got serious questions about how Robert can simply be lifted and taken north of the border, do write or email your MP. They will fob you off. They will fail to answer the question.
Like Robert's own MP has done.
Indeed, but it is putting the MPs under pressure, and this can only be good until Mike gets his digital guillotine running. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, bye.
Same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.